Okay, let's start with a big question. What if everything you've been taught about business is, well, wrong? What if competition is actually for losers and building the future isn't about making small improvements, but creating something that has never existed before? Today, we're diving into Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, a totally contrarian playbook for innovation that really makes you question the rules we all take for granted. So this right here is Peter Thiel's all-time favorite interview question. And it's not a trick, it's a test. It's a test for originality. It cuts right to the absolute heart of his philosophy, that real, meaningful progress comes from thinking for yourself. Because the future isn't something that just happens to us, it's something that gets built. It's built by people who look at the world not just as it is, but as it could be. And that's really the core idea we're going to unpack here. Now, to really get Thiel's vision for the future, we actually have to jump in a time machine and go back. We need to revisit a moment that we all think we know, the dot-com bubble. Why? Because the lessons that Silicon Valley learned from its epic collapse might be the very things holding us back today. You know, it's really easy to look back at the 90s and just dismiss it as a time of crazy, irrational hype, but the context is everything. While Silicon Valley was booming, the rest of the world was in some serious turmoil. You had the East Asian financial crisis in 97, the Russian ruble completely collapsed in 98, the old economy looked like it was failing. So against that grim backdrop, the internet wasn't just an option, it felt like the only way forward. And this belief, this optimism, it fueled an absolutely incredible mania. The Nasdaq just skyrocketed, driven by this deep conviction that this was the dawn of a completely new age. It wasn't just greed, it really felt like a moment of peak clarity. People genuinely believed they were looking far into the future and that technology was the answer to everything. And then, it all came crashing down. The bust was fast and it was brutal. But more importantly, it wasn't just seen as a simple market correction. No, it was interpreted as a kind of moral failing, a divine judgment on the arrogance and the grand visions of the tech world. That whole era of hope was suddenly relabeled as an era of crazed greed. And an entire generation of entrepreneurs learned a lesson, to be afraid of thinking big. And that fear, it hardened into four main lessons that pretty much became the new gospel in Silicon Valley. This is the intellectual baggage from the crash that led straight to things like the lean startup movement. But here's the kicker. According to Thiel, this conventional wisdom isn't just wrong, it's a blueprint for mediocrity. So what did this new safe path look like? Well, first, make only small, incremental advances. Big, grand visions were now officially suspect. Second, stay lean and flexible, which Thiel says is basically code for being unplanned. Just experiment, don't have a big strategy. Third, only improve on what your competitors are already doing. Don't you dare try to create a brand new market. And fourth, focus all your energy on product and just ignore sales. The thinking was, if you build it, they will come. This became the new rulebook. But what if the exact opposite is true? Thiel just flips everything on its head. He argues we should risk being bold rather than trivial. That, hey, a bad plan is actually better than no plan at all. That competitive markets are a trap that just destroys profits, and that sales is every single bit as crucial as product. He's suggesting the true path to success is the one everyone had just learned to be terrified of. So this brings us right to the absolute core concept of the book. To build the future, we have to understand that not all progress is the same. Thiel splits it into two fundamentally different kinds, and this slide illustrates it perfectly. On the one hand, you've got horizontal progress, which is 1 to n. That's just copying things that already work. The best example is globalization. You take a proven model, say from the US, and you scale it up in China. But then you have vertical progress, 0 to 1. That's creating something brand new out of thin air. That, in one word, is technology. Now, when Thiel says technology, he doesn't just mean computers or software. He means any new and better way of doing things. You know, building the first typewriter ever, that was 0 to 1. Then building a word processor to replace it, that was another 0 to 1. But building 100 more typewriters is just 1 to n. The actual act of creation is technology. And here it is, Thiel's own answer to that contrarian question from the very beginning. He argues that while we're all obsessed with globalization, true progress, the kind that saves us, really hinges on technology. Why? Because simply copying today's solutions in a world with scarce resources is completely unsustainable. It leads to conflict and devastation, not prosperity. We need new inventions to create a truly better future. Okay, this is where things get really provocative.
Thiel argues that if you manage to create something truly new, if you actually go from 0 to 1, your goal should not be to compete. It should be to build a monopoly. I know, this sounds totally wrong, right? We're taught from day one that capitalism is competition. But just think about it from the ground up. What's the point of capitalism? To accumulate capital, to earn profits. But what happens in a state of perfect competition? All the profits get competed away, down to 0. So they're actually polar opposites.
So the crucial difference is this. In a competitive market, you're a price taker. You're basically selling a commodity, and over time, your profits are going to trend towards 0. It's a brutal struggle for survival. A monopoly, on the other hand, creates something so unique that it has no real substitute. It owns its market, it gets to set its own price, and it can capture the value it creates for years, maybe even decades. Let's look at a real-world example to make this crystal clear. Back in 2012, the entire U.S. airline industry brought in a massive $160 billion in revenue. But it's such a brutally competitive market that their profit margin was a razor-thin 0.2%. Now compare that to Google, which is a monopoly in search. It made less revenue, sure, but it kept a 21% profit margin. That is over 100 times higher. The lesson here? Creating value for people isn't enough. Your business has to be able to capture some of that value. Now here's the slick part. Monopolies don't want to be called monopolies, so they lie about it. Take Google. As this slide shows, they could define their market really narrowly as, say, the US search advertising market, which they completely dominate. But instead, they frame themselves as just a tiny player in the much, much larger online advertising market, or even the massive global advertising market. By making their pond seem huge, they look like a small fish. Meanwhile, companies in tough competitive markets do the exact opposite. So why does any of this matter? Because creative monopolies, the kind you build by going from 0 to 1, are actually good for all of us. That promise of years of profit is the single greatest incentive to invent new things. And those profits allow companies to plan for the long term, to fund ambitious R&D, and even to afford to be ethical and treat their employees well. In a brutal dog-eat-dog competitive struggle, a business can only think about surviving today. A monopoly has the freedom to think about building tomorrow. And Thiel sums up his entire argument with this brilliant twist on Tolstoy. This is the ultimate takeaway. Success isn't about being the best in a crowded field. It's about being the only one. It's about creating something so new and so valuable that you make the whole idea of competition irrelevant. So the final question isn't just for founders, it's really for all of us. What valuable company is nobody building?